On this edition of Bay Area Bountiful, we examine water and wildfires. First, we look at the potential impact of the recent fires on endangered and threatened fish species native to our rivers and streams, as well as the ongoing conservation efforts to protect them. Then, we visit a wastewater treatment plant in Sonoma and learn how wastewater becomes clean, recycled water, ready to be used for irrigation and other unique applications. It's all coming up next on Bay Area Bountiful.
Bay Area Bountiful is made possible in part by Rocky the free-range chicken and Rosie the original organic chicken. The Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District, Made Local Magazine, and Sonoma County Go Local, and through the generous support of Sonoma Water. Cultivate, celebrate, connect.
Protecting and conserving our water is critical in the face of drought, extreme heat, and wildfires. Some of the ways to mitigate the effects of climate change on our water include riparian corridor restoration, water recycling and reuse to take stress off of our water supply, and assessing the effects of wildfire on our land. David Ackerley is the Dean of UC Berkeley's Rausser College of Natural Resources. We asked him to tell us what impacts climate change has on water and wildfires.
About 10 years ago, I started working in Sonoma County, studying forests up in the hills northeast of Santa Rosa. And a lot of our interest is about how those forests will change over long periods of time, whether that's decades or even centuries, as we look at climate change coming at us now and in the future. Then in 2017, of course, the Tubbs fire came, and suddenly we were caught up, like so many people are, in thinking about how climate and fire and water on the landscape and water in the streams are all coming together in these systems. The first and really important thing is the water that the forests and all the natural vegetation uses, and of course a lot of our farms and gardens, starts as rainfall, comes in those winter rains. And then we get our hot, dry California summer. And the hotter it is, the more water the plants need to begin with. So plants lose water up to the sky as part of the way they grow. They take water from the soil. And the hotter temperatures in this period of climate change are making our summers effectively drier and also making our droughts more intense. In there among the hills and canyons, of course, are the headwaters of our streams, and those come down and become the larger creeks and then eventually feed into the rivers, the Russian River down to San Francisco Bay. So as the fires burn over the landscape, of course, there's connections to them, what happens in the watersheds. There's two short-term connections that are important in the immediate time after a fire. Sometimes we do see that after an intense fire, you'll actually see more water coming down a stream because the trees aren't using it. So when the trees lose all their leaves, for short term, it's usually may just be one season, maybe a couple seasons, you may see an increased flow of water into streams. The other short-term effect is that when you strip off the leaves, the sun shines down and it warms up the water in the stream. And for temperature-sensitive fish, like salmon especially, that can actually be a concern over the short or long term, that as the air warms with climate change, the water warms as well. And maintaining cool water is a critical part of our conservation strategies for cold water fish. So as fire burns the canopy, that has a short-term effect. And then over the long term, managing vegetation along the streams is important for water temperature.
Coho salmon and steelhead trout have long played an important role in stream ecosystems of Northern California, transporting nutrients, helping to keep insect populations in check, and also providing a food source for a wide variety of animals. But these fish are now imperiled. Federal, state, and local agencies, along with environmental nonprofits, have joined together in an effort to protect the fish from extinction and conserve the riparian areas they inhabit. In this Bay Area Bountiful story, we take a closer look at the potential impact of recent North Bay fires on the coho native to our rivers and streams.
The life of a coho salmon begins and ends in fresh water. They are born here, and after spending most of their adult lives in the saltwater ocean, they return to freshwater rivers and streams to spawn before they die. Once plentiful throughout the Russian River watershed, the coho salmon are now endangered. Conservation efforts have helped save the Russian River coho from extinction, but the fish are now facing yet another threat. In August, the Walbridge Fire burned around streams that are a crucial part of their habitat. I'm talking to Don McInhill, Executive Director of conservation nonprofit, Russian River Keeper.
Those streams are where we get our water. Saving that salmon ultimately is about making sure your grandkids can drink clean water.
Nonprofits like Russian River Keeper, along with federal, state, and local agencies, are assessing the fire damage.
Some of these areas have not burned in 100 years since they were logged of first growth redwoods and have grown back in a way that makes them very fire prone with multiple levels of vegetation that can bring the fire up into trees, along with those steep ridges just wicking fire up a hill where it can grow very rapidly and burn intensively, especially with winds.
With the fire nearly contained, the preliminary work is beginning.
We have to prepare for potentially, depending on the severity of the burn, whether it was lightly burned or intensely burned, that can unleash between 6 and up to 20 years of erosion. Forests are like sponges. When we subject them to forest fire, we turn them into almost like parking lots. And the water hits the land and doesn't just run off fast instead of soaking in, it washes the soil off the forest floor into the streams. There will be essentially a triage where we look at the worst hazards, and that's where we start to prioritize resources.
Fisheries scientist Nick Bauer and his colleagues at California Sea Grant's Russian River Salmon and Steelhead Monitoring Program are in the early stages of assessing the impact of the fires on the fish populations.
It looks like 20% approximately of the area where we observed fish was in the Walbridge fire burn area. But we don't know how well the fish survived those areas yet. We have had crews in some of the areas hike through to evaluate it, and we did observe live fish. So we know that at least some fish have survived this. So it's not like everything died in these reaches. Some fish are still alive.
Getting through the winter rains will be the next challenge.
We're worried that landslides could input a lot of soil and sediment into the creeks. And when that happens, it can degrade fish habitat by filling in the deep pools that fish need to survive the summer, as well as filling in the spaces between the gravel that the fish need to spawn in the winter.
The Walbridge fire occurred at the end of a particularly hot and dry summer that had already proved detrimental to the fish. Climate change has not only led to more extreme heat and fires, but it has also affected rain patterns.
In recent years, and with climate change, the rainfall has been more intense. So we have these events where all the rainfall comes in a short period of time instead of being spread out over a longer period of time. And that's bad because when the rain all comes at once, it causes flooding, which can also cause like hill slopes to collapse and makes landslides more likely and can wash fish out of the creeks. It can mobilize gravel where the fish have laid their eggs and wash the eggs out.
The coho salmon plays an important role in the ecosystem. There are many other plant and animal species that are dependent on the coho salmon for their own survival.
There's been over 125 different species observed eating salmon, including animals that we normally think of as being herbivorous, like deer and squirrels. And when the salmon come up into these creeks and they eat the salmon, they bring those salmon nutrients from the ocean up into the hillsides. And so basically, salmon are in turn fertilizing whole forest ecosystems. These forests evolved alongside with the salmon to be fertilized by them. So with them gone, that really decreases the health of the forest and decreases the health of all the animals that rely on these fish as well.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, in collaboration with California Department of Fish and Wildlife and water agency Sonoma Water, run a hatchery program for coho salmon and steelhead trout. Greg Horton is a principal environmental specialist at Sonoma Water.
Beginning in the early 2000s, we started a hatchery program at Warm Springs Hatchery. And that program has largely been responsible for saving the coho probably from extinction. Back in the early 2000s, we were down to really a small handful of adult coho returning to the Russian River to spawn. And now we're up to a few hundred fish returning to spawn and maybe a dozen or so streams.
Some of these key streams for coho recovery, such as Mill Creek, Gray Creek, and Gilliam Creek, were in the footprint of the Wall Ridge Fire. The fire will likely change the fish hatchery's release plan this year, just as it did in 2017, when the Tubbs Fire affected Mark West Creek.
What we elected to do in 2017 after the Tubbs Fire was to not stock Mark West Creek, not release fish into Mark West Creek.
I visited the Mark West Creek area with Karen Gaffney about a year after the Tubbs Fire. Karen is the Conservation Planning Manager at the Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District. She says that conservation of riparian corridors, the areas in and around streams and rivers, has many benefits, including fire mitigation.
The work that we did in collaboration with NASA after the 2017 complex fires demonstrated pretty conclusively that riparian corridors throughout the entire fire footprint acted as a buffer for the fires. So those areas did not burn in the same way that the surrounding landscape burns.
Conserving riparian corridors not only will help fish species like the coho salmon survive, but it can also help lessen the impact of drought, floods, and erosion while protecting our water supply.
It's really important that the riparian corridor and the streams stay intact and act as a buffer for sediment flows that may come down the hills after a fire, especially if it's a fire of very severe intensity, as we did experience in 2017 and since then.
Climate change is causing more extreme weather events around the world, leading to the catastrophic fires Northern California has experienced in recent years. Reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is fundamental in the fight against climate change. Prescribed fire could be a tool to mitigate fire risk.
We're learning slowly from the incredible wisdom of tribes who have used fire as a cultural and a stewardship tool for millennia, and used it as a mechanism to manage the landscape so that it wasn't subject to the kind of catastrophic fires that we are experiencing as a result both of climate change and also the way that we've managed our forests, and of disease and many other factors.
We've caused and contributed to a lot of the challenges faced by plants and animals like the coho salmon. But we can also come together to help protect these species.
Extinction is forever, and we only understand a small part of what it would mean, and there's really no going back from extinction. And these fish really are very much on the brink, and that's why I think there's so many great people doing fantastic work to try to turn that around.
In the face of a warming climate, we are very concerned about the future of water supplies for agriculture, water supplies for human use, and also making sure enough water is flowing down streams and rivers for fish, for native vegetation, and for those natural habitats. Under a hotter climate, there's more pressure in all of these uses. Farmers may need more water evaporates off of natural ecosystems. On top of that, the model suggests that we could have even longer and more intense periods of drought, in the sense of really low rainfall, just like we had from 2013 to 2016. So there's a number of things we can do, but we certainly know the less water we use, the less we need, the more resilient and the more robust our systems will be when we face water shortages. So really the cutting edge of this technology for water engineers is recycling of wastewater for reuse in urban systems. The purification systems that we now have can get water to absolutely as clean as anything you would take out of any other water system. So certainly this is something that people will be getting used to.
Recycled water is a very important part of overall water management and water conservation, especially when climate change can result in extreme heat, drought, and wildfires. When recycled water is used for agricultural and urban irrigation, it reduces the need to use surface water or groundwater for those purposes. Recycled water can even be used for habitat restoration, In this story, we learn about the process of wastewater treatment and how the applications of recycled water help offset water demands in our region.
In California, we've had record-breaking heat waves the last few years. Ensuring we have enough water from year to year is vitally important. So I wondered, once I use water in my home, like from the sink or the shower, what happens to it after that? I visited the Sonoma Valley Wastewater Treatment Plant to find out. First, I spoke with Jay Jaspers, Chief Engineer and Director of Groundwater Management for Sonoma Water.
In general, when we look at big picture in our region, when we look at it from a water management perspective, we really look at 4 ways we have to meet the need for water. One is water conservation is a way we actually reduce the demand. That's a way to meet part of the demand. A second is use of treated wastewater or recycled water as it's known. That can help take some of that water demand and take that off the table too. And then we have our 2 major water supply sources, which are surface water and groundwater. And so surface water in Sonoma County, the primary, it's not the only surface water source, but the primary surface water source is along the Russian River. So if you look at those 4 choices we have or opportunities we have to meet water demand, our strategy is to do as much conservation as possible and to reduce the overall demand for water as much as possible. The second thing we do is we look at leveraging as much of the recycled water use, so we're not discharging it into waterways, but we're actually reusing it then to meet water demands. And then with the remaining net demand for water, what we have to do is we have to balance surface water and groundwater. And some years are better to use surface water when we have wet years and our reservoirs are full and our streams are full. Other years, when we have droughts, we have to lean more on the groundwater because we don't have as much surface water. We're only going to be more resilient in being able to do that and do that balancing act if we maximize conservation and we maximize recycled water so that our job in balancing groundwater and surface water to meet the net demands is a little bit easier.
Next, I spoke with Kevin Booker, Water Agency Principal Engineer for Sonoma Water, about some of the ways recycled water can be used.
A lot of the wastewater treatment plants up here, at least in Northern California, a lot of recycled water is used for agricultural irrigation. And as you can see around us, a lot of vineyards. This particular plant, we also do pasture land. And then also for wetlands enhancement. So out over in the southern part of our system, we have management units that we constructed. And we place recycled water in those management units, mainly in the fall for migratory waterfowl. So as they're coming through, need a place to land, a good, water sort of pond for them to land. So we use it for that. And we've been doing that for, I want to say, well over 20 years.
Another use of recycled water is, and this is mainly in the urban areas, where recycled water is used to irrigate golf courses or commercial turf or irrigation of commercial landscaping. And what that does is it replaces the need for potable water supplies, such as water from the Russian River system. So it helps take some stresses off the Russian River system, as well as some cities may pump groundwater also for part of their water supply. So it can help offset groundwater too.
After I understood some of the applications of recycled water, it was time to see the process of how wastewater goes from, wastewater to clean and safe recycled water.
So for this treatment plant is the largest that the Water Agency manages. It has an average dry weather flow of 3 MGD. In terms of the Bay Area, it's a very small plant. There are plants that are way bigger than this one. So what we have here is the influent. And this is where the wastewater comes into the treatment plant. And if you want to take a look down, that's it. And you can see all the stuff that's coming into the plant. So we're going to go to the grit chamber next. It's where really the effluent gets pumped through and where we sort of remove all of the paper, sometimes money. This is what happens, where it gets captured and it gets disposed of here, and obviously we have our waste haulers come and haul it away. We're screening out even the more finer particles that's in the wastewater. So right you see right behind me are our aeration basins where the bugs live. What you see is that we're pumping air through the mixture. There's, feeds the bugs eat, the material that's in the wastewater. And then really from there we send it over to one of our clarifiers, again, where some of the smaller particles will get settled out. And that goes over to our tertiary filters. There are tertiary filters in here. And this system here allows us to treat up to 16 MGD, 16 million gallons per day. Again, they're cloth filters, just another one of a type of tertiary treatment that you can use. Other plants use ultraviolet light. So there's a number of ways to get to tertiary. This one uses cloth filters. It's really another level of treatment is what it is. Again, it's to meet certain Title 22 requirements. And as you go from secondary to tertiary, your uses of recycled water goes up as well. So unfortunately, you can't see it, but after this process goes through the tertiary filters, it gets chlorinated. And as a requirement, it has to have a certain contact time with the chlorine. And what you see over here to my right is our chlorine contact chamber. The water flows through. It has to meet a certain contact time. Once it's done that, it goes through another pipe. And at that point, because we can't discharge water with chlorine in it, we have to dechlor it. So we add another chemical to dechlor it. And then at that point, it's ready to go out the door. For every gallon of recycled water used, you are saving a gallon of potable water. It leaves that gallon so that gallon can go to a household or to a business. And I think that's the impact. For groundwater, there's that benefit as well, is that if a vineyard or any other kind of agricultural, rather than pump groundwater, if you use recycled water, that's 1 gallon of water that can stay in the ground, that can help replenish that groundwater.
And that's proven very important in this groundwater basin because there are areas of groundwater decline. And to the south of the basin, the southern part of the basin, borders with the San Pablo Bay, which is saline water. And so if groundwater levels are declining, saline water can encroach in and you have seawater intrusion. So if you're able to use recycled water to help irrigate the crops, you don't pump as much groundwater and you can help combat that seawater intrusion. So that's one example of the value of recycled water in the overall portfolio. And we see it here with this plant and how this water is used for a very important beneficial use.
In the drought, the recent drought that we just had, I want to say maybe I think it was 2014, 2015, we started a program to allow homeowners to come in and fill up on recycled water to go home and irrigate their plants during droughts. I think a lot of other agencies in the Bay Area did that as well. Unfortunately, as there was more rain, the demand went down. And so we're always poised so that if a drought occurs, we can sort of restart that program. The more we conserve, the better off we'll be in the long run. So even though we may not be in a drought right now, I think we all should try to use as the least amount of water as possible. Obviously use it for your indoor, but outdoor, if you have the ability for gray water, for rainwater capture, I would encourage you to do that. If your local sanitation facility or water producer offers recycled water in a residential program, I would say take advantage of that and just constantly do what you can to conserve water, because with climate change, we just don't know what's down the road.
We need to be paying close attention to our water supplies. And in some cases, this means, some people feel we really need to increase our ability to store water. If we're gonna have more droughts, we need to increase storage. And at the same time, other folks are looking more to better use of groundwater and not overdrawing groundwater, but trying to recharge groundwater reserves so that we're able to use those as a buffer through dry periods. And of course, using less. The less we use, the less we need to depend on these expanded systems for water supplies. And eventually this takes us down to a path of recycling wastewater and having recycled water be part of our urban water systems. So all of these are steps that maybe right at first you don't say, oh, is that climate change adaptation? But these are all part of a set of changes that we need to tackle, because whether we have drier summers or longer droughts or more intense droughts, all of these things play out as problems for the water system, problems for agriculture. So all of these kinds of strategies that we're looking at are part of thinking about how to adapt for climate change.